Hey there, and welcome to the PK Beats channel, where we comfortably judge others based solely off of their appearance. Basically, in my last video I briefly mentioned how I had thought of ranking all of the 100 plus stages in the game based purely on how I felt of their aesthetics. You know, that good old eye candy factor. And clearly, since this video exists now, that idea got a lot of support in the comments. And since it's been well over a year since the last time I made a video just sorta talking about how things looked, I think we're due for something like this. Now, I'm adding this part after having all the script and whatnot done, and I do want to point out that when I first thought of this video idea, I was hoping to go more in depth about each individual stage, but that just showed how little I understood the scope of this project. Because of that, a lot of my commentary on the stages is a bit more surface level, you know, me pointing out observations and giving my opinions on them, which I hope is still interesting, and I try to get involved when I can, but you know. If this video does well enough, maybe I could do something a little bit smaller in the future, maybe paying attention to only 1 or 2 stages per video, but otherwise this is still a pretty good look at each stage in my opinion, so I hope y'all still enjoy. I feel like laying some groundwork for these types of things is important, so let me spend a few minutes doing that. First, as a general rule of thumb, I'll be looking at a stage's omega variant, as this usually provides the best means of just taking in a stage's vibe, at least for me, but in cases where I feel like their normal variants better show off their themes, then I'll just use that. So basically, when the two variants are somewhat different, but not different enough to change the whole feel of the stage, I'll choose the version that I like more. But for stages where their omega variants look considerably different from their normal variants, to the point where I would rank them differently, then I'll tackle them both as if they're separate. So for example, Battlefield, Small Battlefield, and Big Battlefield will all be encompassed in their omega form on the tier list, whereas 3D Land will be separated between its normal form, where it has more focus on grassy plains and some canyons and whatnot, and its omega form, who has more focus on the water and a bit of rocky terrain. And speaking of transformation stages, I've decided that I'll just rank each individual transformation separately, but only if they're different enough to warrant being separated, or I guess if I just feel like it. So the Delfino Plaza transformations all kind of share the same overall vibe to me, so I'll consider it one stage, but something like Castle Siege has some pretty different aesthetics going throughout its 3 variants, so I'll consider them different. And no, I'm not touching the custom stages, since not only are they technically infinite, but they all just use the backgrounds that other normal stages in the game use, and, well, this video's already long enough. So I'm just ignoring those as well as any other places in the game that you could consider stages, just whatever's in the standard stage selection screen. Second, yes, we're going to be doing this usual tier list format, not only because this seems to be the preferred method of ranking, but also because it'll let me cover stages in chunks rather than having to tackle them on an individual level in some kind of order. To further that idea, the order in which I'll be covering the stages will start off by tier, but then focus more on a certain common theme. So it's going to be a little bit everywhere, you know, some will be in D and then the next one will be B or A or whatever, but the theming will be more connected. To describe what the tiers represent, D tier is the not for me tier, C tier is decent but meh, B is I like it, A is I love it, and S is favorite. So yeah, ultimately there aren't any stages I outright dislike. All of them at least have their merit. Okay, well that is a lie. There's maybe like 3 or so stages that I do outright dislike, but I figure the last thing this list needs is another tier, and thus more verticality like you're gonna see towards the end. So let's just assume that I at least don't hate anything, alright? Also, yeah, if you couldn't tell, this tier list is an incredibly subjective one. So I'm not even gonna try and make it appear argumentative, so expect to hear me bring up nostalgia for a certain series or an aesthetic just not being for me, and don't expect any texturing or 3D modeling artistic expertise to come out. I'm just a dude with eyes who likes seeing pretty colors. Speaking of 3D modeling, before we get into the rankings and whatnot, I'd like to thank today's video sponsor, Yahaha Studio. Yahaha is a brand new creation platform built around user-generated content, with a focus on a 3D multiplayer interactive experience. With Yahaha, anyone can create and publish their own virtual experiences without any coding experience or server knowledge, both of which I have absolutely none of. Simply use the available templates, components, and smart assets in Yahaha Studio to make whatever your heart desires. And even if you feel overwhelmed, there's plenty of tutorials and options to learn about the program and get used to everything. To show it off a little bit, here I can select the hide and seek game template, which drops you off in a pre-built world full of stuff to tinker with. What I can do is then download and apply my own models. In the spirit of Halloween, I'll choose something spooky, like a skeleton. And I can also download components that I can apply to the models, this one being a player transformation one. Apply that to the skeleton, and go into playtest, and now you can turn yourself into it for hide and seek. And trust me, there's a lot more that you can do to customize, and a lot more templates to have fun with. So if you want to test things out and make your own little 3D gaming experience that you can play and share, click the link down below and join Yahaha's early access now for free. And thank you Yahaha for sponsoring today's video. Alright, that's enough delays, let's just talk about things. Starting with D tier, anything that I perceive as extra bland will probably fit right in here. And I think a good example to start with would be the training room stage. Now, I love numbers and grids and stuff. Being able to measure and be precise is cool, but when talking about aesthetics, I'm not gonna lie, the white isn't doing it for me. I would definitely like it way more if it had a dark mode variant, of which there are mods for, but for now, the endless white and gray grid pattern is a hard pass for me. So yeah, that's in the D tier. And on a similar note, PictoChat 2 is kinda the same, right? Well, originally I just placed it in D tier because of that, but I let my opinions on this stage sit a little longer and I don't know. Based on how D tier ends up looking, I feel like I don't dislike this style on the stage enough to lump it in with them. Like sure, it's super simple, but it's still got the cute PictoChat layout going on, and the drawings in the background are especially charming. So honestly, because of that, I decided that I should at least put it in C tier. Maybe I'll change my mind in the future, like I probably will for quite a few of these stages. Trust me, I change my mind a lot. But yeah. I feel as though I should also mention Wii Fit Studio, cause that one's also a bit basic, right? But I don't know, I feel like there's something more zen about this stage. And I don't even have any particular nostalgia for Wii Fit, though I do have it for that era in general. Of course, it's also unique with the mirror that appears at the beginning and whatnot, which I think is really neat and adds to the vibe. Not to mention its overall color is more teal than just a plain white or gray. Maybe it also helps that I'm a little bit of a gym bro. I mean, not really, I don't go to the gym anymore, but I do have my own gym set up at home. And I like the overall vibe of gyms, so I don't know. It feels a bit comforting because of all that. And I want to stick to that sort of zen word. So I want to put it in the B tier at least. I don't think I'd feel right to put it any higher though. Next, just plain and simple, I'm putting Wrecking Crew in D tier. Aesthetically, it's really just a construction site, which alone definitely is not winning any awards for me, but the backdrop is just a city during the day. There are times where I like the city aesthetic, which we'll get into, but just a basic urban environment during the day, especially with all those grays and whatnot, is a vibe I really don't care for, especially when the city does not feel alive. It's different when you're there in person, where the scope of the large buildings and the bustling life are more present, but that's not exactly being shown off here. So I do not really like it, and it doesn't help that in one video I had to play through this stage for like 2 hours straight, and I think that really drove home my lack of love for this appearance. Speaking of cities, technically New Donk City Hall has that same issue, where the whole vibe is just kinda city-like. I mean sure, the City Hall has some gold on it, but I don't feel like that helps a ton. It also doesn't help that this world, even in Mario Odyssey, just has a backdrop of infinite cityscape, which frankly makes it even worse than Wrecking Crew. I always felt that in Odyssey too, how looking out and just seeing an infinite number of city buildings, it felt strangely, I don't know how to describe it, suffocating and liminal? I'm not sure. It's a bit more neat playing it in the game itself for the same reasons I mentioned before about actually physically being in a city, but here it's just not doing it for me. It's a shame too, because in Odyssey, there's not only the raining set piece for the city, which I think looks super cool, but there's also the Jump Up Superstar one that also looks way cooler. It's a shame those aren't present here, but I'm also going to put that in a D tier. Oh, and another city option would be Prism Tower, though this at least has more color going throughout its buildings and whatnot, which makes it feel less stuffy to me. I still don't love it though because it's got the same type of lifeless repetition, but the more blue color overall plus the Prism Tower in the center are both at least a little bit cooler to me, so I'll put that in C tier. However, there's also a nighttime portion of the stage, which of course I've considered a separate option because cities at night look way cooler than cities during the day, and I don't think that's a particularly uncommon opinion. The lights going all around, plus the bigger lights on the Prism Tower itself, makes it feel more alive than before, on top of just looking very pretty. Though I do feel as though the monotony of the buildings and whatnot does harm its overall vibe, which prevents it from going into S tier for me for what would otherwise be an S tier setting, but I think it still sits at A tier considering how much I like the basic vibe. I guess I'll tackle all of the city stages here. Yeah, like I said, the order in which I'll be tackling stages was going to be a bit all over the place, but it's more smooth that way and I have to repeat myself less. So Foreside is a city that's perpetually at night and is Earthbound themed, so that alone probably tells you it'd be high up, and yeah, you're right. I love how this looks way more than Prism Tower. Even if its Earthbound theming isn't really there, it's still an excellent look at a city at night with different shapes and some different light colors too, and you can faintly see the water in the distance. Yeah, this is what I like from a nighttime city, S tier. And the last cityscape option is Moray Towers, whose daytime version actually does win some points. There's plenty of different colors with the billboards and whatnot, and the city itself doesn't feel like it's entirely a copy-paste of the same two buildings. Not only this, but there's actual moving cars in the background too. As far as daytime cities go, I think this is actually pretty good, even as someone who isn't a Splatoon fan. It feels properly alive and has some cool ink effects on the stage itself, so I think I'm fine placing it in B tier. However, the Splatfest version is the nighttime theme, and I feel like this is another really solid appearance for nighttime cities. I mean, you're taking a city that already looked and felt pretty good during the day, and giving it all the benefits of a city at night, and yeah, this is something I love to look at. I feel like the colors pop a lot better too, because there's a lot more purples and whatnot, which I really like for nighttime things. And the ink colors on the stage, again, add some nice diversity. So personally, I think I'll put this in S tier. I'm not sure if I'd put it below or above Foreside, and I'm not really ranking things within each individual tier, so I'll just keep them together. Going back to the D tier finally, Hand and Bow is just kinda lame. Like, I don't really care for anything from this stage, but the aesthetics are definitely also a part of that. Now, if we were judging based off of functionality, the fact that this stage can serve as a good green screen place is technically worth considering, but green screening stuff takes effort and that's not something I can enjoy while playing the game itself. So I'll just barely not consider that and just place it right in D tier. Next, honestly, I think it's fair for me to tackle all of the retro stages at once here. And I'm going to be using the word retro a lot, but I feel like that's a bit of a vague word. Like, I wouldn't really consider Super Nintendo or Game Boy Advance games to be retro, but there may be people who do? I don't know the specifics. Just know that when I mean retro, I generally mean like before the 90s, or at least feeling that way. I want to start by saying that I love pixel art. It's a medium of art that I wish more of the AAA studios would focus on, though that love for pixel art is not an all-encompassing one. And it usually goes into like the GBA games or the Super Nintendo games. The truly retro forms are just a bit bland to me, and I don't have the nostalgia for that era to carry any other emotions. So yes, unfortunately I have not spent hours of my life stomping Koopas or anything. Still though, I struggled with how I thought of these stages, because even if they're not exactly what I want from pixel art, it's still pixel art, and there's a charm to that. A charm that certain other stages simply do not have. But ultimately, I did think of a few of those retro stages that I wanted to put in D tier. Those being 75M, Mario Bros, Balloon Fight, Flat Zone X's Omega Form, and Dreamland GB's Omega Form. I think they're all just a bit too much on the bland side compared to the other stages that use pixel art. There's a few others that I originally also had in the D tier, but after thinking on them, I decided that they had a bit more character to them that I liked, those being Mushroom Kingdom and Duck Hunt. I feel like they're less dull overall, potentially because of the better color scheme? I don't know, just feels like a step closer to what I'd like in pixel art from the others. In the case of Mushroom Kingdom, it might be how they handled the move into more 3D stuff on the stage, with the actual Mario Bros sprites being in the background, which I think just looks real neat. I guess it's just a combination of factors that barely brings these two up, though I can see myself switching my position depending on the day. So yeah, these two are in C tier. Next, you'll notice that earlier, I specified Flat Zone X Omega and Dreamland GB Omega. This is because I feel like the normal versions of each stage are different in one important area, that being the border that shows the device is being played on. I think this difference alone is able to sort of recontextualize the whole retro vibe in a way that I actually like quite a bit. I do think it would have been even cooler if they had some sort of like real background for the system rather than a black void, but still, I think these two stages show off a pretty cool representation of the retro era to me because of this recontextualization. So I want to put them both in the B tier. Next for the oldies, I'm gonna be honest, I don't like how Pac-Land looks, either it or its Omega form, which I separated because one has more focus on a green backdrop and whatnot. Either way though, I never liked this type of aesthetic that's found in arcade games. It's hard to describe how it's different from others, it just looks a bit ugly to me, you know? So these go in D tier. Perhaps that one video I did a long time ago where I tried to get to level 999 or something in this stage has made me dislike looking at it even more. Something similar to Wrecking Crew, huh? But I don't know, I've tested extensively on other stages and didn't get sick of them, so I think the fact that those two stages made me go a bit insane has more to do with their vibes rather than the fact that I was doing something super monotonous for hours. Who can say? And I don't know, I know it's not retro, but I feel like WarioWare Incorporated sort of fits that and I don't really have anywhere else to put it, so let's talk about it here. Basically, I think it's neat. And when it comes to simplicity, I much prefer the black color and whatnot, and the minigames are all very fun. I consider them all as one big package. And overall, I think the stage has a good goofy feel that I kinda enjoy, with the usual WarioWare charm. It's just fun and cute, you know? But it doesn't go far beyond that, so I'll just give it a B tier. And I might as well also quickly crank out the other Wario stage, that being Gamer. This one is hard for me to think about because its main gameplay mechanic, you know, hiding from mom, is technically just that, gameplay, which I'm generally not judging here. But I also feel like that element really does affect the whole stage's vibe. And let me tell you, the vibe of fighting while also having to hide from 5-volt is not only super charming, both in its presentation and just the idea itself, but it's also super suspenseful and has always made this stage stick in my head. If you want to lessen the amount of which I consider gameplay a factor, I'd just put this in A tier, since I would still love it and it's still really cute looking. But I don't think I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna consider it all one package and put it in S tier. Actually, going back to the old school vibe, while I'm at it, I'm just gonna cover all of the other stages that are based on, like, pixel art and whatnot, regardless of if they're considered retro. Mushroom Kingdom 2 is perhaps the most appealing sprite-based stage in the game, which I find really shocking since I didn't think Super Mario Bros. 2 looked all that fascinating. But I guess they just really vamped up the colors and details and whatnot when bringing the stage into Smash, and I just love how it looks. Being the best representation of pixel art, a medium that I love dearly, I feel like I just have to put it in A tier. Still nothing that really knocks my socks off, but I really appreciate at least good representation. Another one is Mute City SNES, which is a Super Nintendo game, but I don't know. I feel like its graphics don't scratch that same itch that pixel art usually does for me. I still think it's better than the D tier ones, it's got more colors and details and whatnot, but it feels like it has a lot of repetition looking into the sea of, whatever that is past the tracks. It does kind of hurt my head a bit, but it's still a nice use of pixel art, so I'm just going to put it in the C tier. And finally, for the pixel art based stages, Super Mario Maker has 3 of them. Yeah, I've separated out each of the 4 game appearances it can go by. It's kind of hard to judge them based on aesthetics when it's literally just Mario games. Not to mention you can't use the camera to really look anywhere, so that definitely doesn't help me appreciate the sights. First, I'm going to put the Mario Bros variant of Mario Maker in D tier. Even though I put Mario Bros in C tier, I feel like that was a pretty close call, and this Mario Maker variant loses any extra flair with how it's literally just the Mario Bros graphics, no unique 3D blocks or aesthetics or anything. The Mario Bros 3 variant will probably have to go here too for similar reasons. I don't have a lot of nostalgia for these games and they're just a bit too restricted in this setting. Now the Super Mario World version is different. I loved playing this game as a kid, and honestly its graphics are still some of my favorites in side-scrolling Mario to date. It encompasses that type of pixel art that I think ages beautifully. That is, the game itself does. Its representation here unfortunately leaves a little bit to be desired. They've chosen the most basic environment from the game, and again, you can't really use the camera. So unfortunately I can't rank this as high like I did for Mushroom Kingdom 2, but I will at least give it a B tier for the reason that I do still really like how Super Mario World looks. Oh, and there's the new Super Mario Bros. Version. Even though it's ultimately pretty simple, I do think the background looks unique compared to other simple background types. The big slanting rock pillars are honestly really cool, and I like all of the colors that are going on, but only being able to see what's right here without much camera movement, plus with the typical Mario stuff on the stage itself, it does lose a few points, so I'm gonna put this in C tier. For a better look at that cool tilted rock pillar thing, we can go to the first part of Mushroom Kingdom here. And honestly, being able to get a better look at everything and having the stage itself with a slightly different color and material, I think this all looks really cool. Even if it's in the kinda typical modern side-scrolling Mario vibe, I like the color of the grass and trees, and the rock pillar is a great set piece, so I actually think I kinda like this one, and it goes into B tier. As for the other Mushroom Kingdom parts, I think the pink cloud section is really pretty and dreamlike. I mean, I guess it's an orangish pink. Either way, I just kinda like how it looks. It feels a bit whimsical, so I'll toss this in B tier too. Then there's the spiral rock part, which I think looks a bit more visually interesting than the canyon part from 3D Land. It's like the rocks look like coral reefs that's sticking way out from the ocean, and I think that's a neat idea. I feel like its execution in this game is a bit lacking, primarily when you try to look at more details with the camera, since that's when you start seeing, you know, voids. But I do think this vibe is really cool, so again, this is a B tier. And the final form is the castle look. Now, I know that there are plenty of these castle levels in the Mario series, I've played plenty of them, but for some reason when I see something like this, specifically, my brain goes right to that one level in Donkey Kong Country 2, the one with the same gimmick where you're going up a castle and whatnot. I absolutely loved the music in that level, as I did with basically the entire soundtrack. But I don't know, because of that, whenever I see this part of the stage, I just sort of get reminded of that and feel happy. But I don't think I'd feel right putting it in a tier higher with the things that I love, since the aesthetics of this in and of itself is just something that I like. So once again, this goes in the B tier. Good for Mushroom Kingdom U, it got straight Bs. Guess it helps not being too super basic. On that note, let's talk about the other basic Mario stages. For 3D Land, even though this does shake it up with a canyon section and the short section with the water and spikes, I still feel like they all sort of blend into one basic Mario vibe to me. I don't dislike Mario vibes by any means, and as far as the more basic grassy type of aesthetics go, I think this is fine, but it still kinda just screams basic to me. Yeah, as you can tell, that's the only word I really have for it. I appreciate it for being a bit more unique than just grass or a forest, but I don't know, I just don't feel much from it, so I'm just gonna put this in C tier. However, since the Omega version stays on the water section with the spikes and rocky terrain, I think that gives it a bit more of an edge. Especially since I have a weakness for big bodies of water, which you'll see throughout this video. So it's a big body of water, and it has things on top of it that makes it more unique, in this case being spike pillars and the use of rocky cliff areas. So this honestly is a really pleasant backdrop and checks off a lot of my boxes. I'm putting it in A tier. As for Golden Plains, I mean, this doesn't even have anything unique going on. It is unapologetically your standard Mario background. I like the colored hills, but that's about all that interests me. Frankly, I can't find much that I really care for on this one. So while I can appreciate it from a far distance, this stage definitely isn't for me in how basic it feels, and I want to put it in D tier. Alright, I've talked about a lot of bland stuff now, and looking at some other stages I have left to talk about, I feel like I'm just gonna blaze through some of the other ones that I consider bland. Most of these types of stages will fall into C tier, as usually I do like grassy plains and sunny days and small bodies of water and stuff like that, you know? I'm a big nature guy, I like summer and whatnot. But I will reserve the D tier for the particularly boring ones. So something like Rainbow Cruise, right? Just a pretty basic stock footage looking background with little unique features. C tier. Yoshi's Island Melee, which is a bit more stylized, but still another C tier for me. Green Greens is another one that, while I do enjoy Kirby, this overall feels pretty meh. C tier. However, at least the stage has some kind of background detail and, like, looks decent. Whereas Dreamland, the similar one, is struggling a bit on the polygon count and has a background that just doesn't really move, and I'm not a huge fan of the colors. I'm not gonna lie, low polygon graphics haven't aged as well as pixel art, and I don't have any emotions attached to them, especially in this context, so I'm putting Dreamland in D tier. Princess Peach's Castle and Peach's Castle are both a similar case, where Princess Peach's Castle looks decent but dull, so it's in C tier. But Peach's Castle is more like the N64 era, with a not very good looking background, so I'm putting that in D tier. While we're at that, there's a few other Nintendo 64 stages that I could cover. First, Saffron City actually has a moving background, but it's just the usual bland gray cityscape, which I've already voiced my thoughts on, so D tier. And for Hyrule Castle, I honestly remembered it being worse in the graphic department. It still has a static background, but it feels more like a painting than a blurry image, maybe? And I think its colors mesh a little bit better. So compared to some of the others, I just like it a little bit more. It's slightly better on the eyes. So C tier. Moving on, Windy Hill Zone is another case where I can see its style, but it's just meh, so that's going into C tier. Though I do think Green Hill Zone is a bit more interesting in its style and layout in the background, which I appreciate even as someone who isn't into Sonic. So that goes to B tier. Similarly with Spiral Mountain, nothing really stands out to me, but I respect how diverse it looks due to its stylization and plenty of references. But I feel like this stylization doesn't stand out quite as much, so I still want to put it in the C tier. Again, I may like it more if I had more attachment to the series, but I don't. Similarly, again, with Yggdrasil's Altar, I think it's pronounced Yggdrasil, maybe? but a lot of it just feels like filler space and not enough stands out to truly interest me in the long run. I'm sure there's a lot of very cool references to Dragon Quest XI, but I'm not really a fan of that series nor the game, so again, another C tier. Next, I have to admit, Spirit Train should follow the bland logic, since it's just kinda just grass and trees, right? But I really like Spirit Tracks, and the train is just really fun to look at and be a part of. Trains are cool. So that bias is gonna have to bump it up a little bit. I do wish the stage went to other biomes in the game though, so it can't be bumped up too high, but I do like it, so it's a B tier. Similarly, Guard Plain is also just a bunch of grass and whatnot, but I do think it wins a lot of extra points for the added uniqueness to it. What with the funky slopes and the hulking Mechonis in the distance. Again, there's also nostalgia. I love Xenoblade Chronicles, the first game, and that sacred feeling of stepping out into Guard Plain for the first time is awesome. But on top of that, there's also the looping day-night cycle, which I consider to be one big package here, unlike Prism Tower. Like, I don't think this splits the whole stage into two parts, but rather just amplifies it as a whole, and it looks really cool at night. I really do enjoy the basic grassy plains and whatnot, if they're done right, and I think this is the best form of that in the game, or at least one of them. So I'm gonna put that into A tier. For another one that you could consider basic, why not the stage, Battlefield? While this does sometimes feel basic, when you actually take the time to look at the background, it's pretty beautiful actually. Loads of waterfalls everywhere, which alone I love, but there's also tons of little islands that look neat, and the ice mineral things that stick around throughout the stage and below the stage itself. And there's also the floating islands and whatnot. I don't know, it all combines to make me feel like it's an actual unique little setting. Doesn't really feel like a cheap copy and paste of bland stock assets. And even if the colors are generally a bit blue, well, I sure do like blue. And I just think this is awesome. So I love it. A tier. Alright, next is Minecraft World. Now I have played a lot of Minecraft in my life. And ever since I started using shaders and whatnot, it's been kinda hard for me to appreciate what the base game looks like. Like, I've grown so used to the Minecraft style that it stopped being interesting for me. But when I take a step back to really look at it, it is kind of exactly what I like, I love pixel art and that sort of simplicity, but it's still diverse enough to be interesting and at least somewhat pretty. And it's that in 3D. So as an overall, I think Minecraft looks really nice and fun. So that alone makes it a baseline B tier, especially when you factor in the day-night cycle. Though it's not like that makes things particularly beautiful anywhere. But there's 6 biomes to choose from, and while I guess there isn't really a reason to separate those biomes, I kinda felt like I should, since my opinions on each Minecraft biome are different, so I'll just rank them all. Plains and Savannah can go down to the C tier, since I think the plains are just whatever, and I've never loved the color of the grass in the Savannah biome. Birch Forest and Taiga can go into the B tier, since I think they're at least a bit more neat. I'd like the Birch Forest a lot more if they implemented those changes they suggested a while back, but that doesn't really matter for Smash itself, and here in the background there's a lot more hills and mountains, which I think looks cool. And the Snowy Tundra is in the B tier as well. It's more unique visually, but as someone who lives in a place where it's winter for like half the year, I'm not exactly eager to just look at snow. I think it can look pretty of course, but it kinda doesn't in Minecraft, so I'll just put that there. And my favorite is the Stone Shore, which I've always thought was a super cool biome addition. It's just a really cool idea. Not to mention, using the camera you can see a dark oak forest to the left, which is another one of my favorite biomes. So you combine that classic Minecraft style that I already like, and organize it with a large body of water and a rocky mountain and a beach, and just like the Omega 3D land, that's a good A tier for me. Next are the 2 Mario racetrack stages. Figure 8 circuit is just kinda whatever. I like racetracks, but this doesn't really get past that, so it's C tier. And Mario Circuit is a bit cooler with all of its loops and upside down sections and whatnot. And even if it's still just your basic grassy tree having setup or whatever, I like those loops and the floating islands and whatnot. So I think it's cooler, B tier. I'm starting to feel like I need to be less pokey with this process. Wait, did I really write that in the script? Oh god, I did not know how much longer this script was gonna take at that time. Oh, poor me. Anyways, let's start clumping up stages together. Let's start with the arts and craft type stages. As an overall warning, I just don't really care for that sorta arts and crafts vibe. Like the cardboards and the papers and all that kind of stuff. I don't know, it's just never been an aesthetic that I really cared for. So even if I can acknowledge its creativity and appreciate that, it's generally only a C tier for me. So these all include Yoshi's Story, Super Happy Tree, and the first portion of Paper Mario. Now I do think the Paper Mario stage has some cool transitions that I like. Those being the sunset boat thing, which I think looks real pretty, and the Bowser's Castle one, which I think has good colors, and I think castles are generally cool. So being carried by my distant appreciation for the arts and crafts thing, those can at least be carried to B tier. Also, I guess Yoshi's Island is kind of fitting for that too, with his color book-esque design. Though, honestly, I kind of like the crayon look more than the cardboard and paper and whatnot. And the variety of seasons is very nice too. I don't think they're different enough to warrant a separate input, at least for me, but that whole drawing aesthetic is kind of cute, and I like looking at this stage way more. So it's also a B tier. And honestly, for this one, I could see myself thinking it's an A tier at some parts of my life. Like right now, I still think it is a B tier, but I don't know, the crayons are just really cool and I do love the season variety. But for now, I'll just keep it in B tier. Next, how about we do all of these stadiums? First would be Pokemon Stadium, and Pokemon Stadium 2. As you know, these stages do have minor transformations, but because they affect the platform you're on and not the background or vibe generally, I'm just going to consider them a part of the stage rather than separate things to rate. And in doing that, I really like Pokemon Stadium. I love how you can see the night sky, and the fireworks are a really nice touch, and I think the colors overall are great. Not only this though, but the setting is great too. Having the screen in the background follow the movement of your character or camera is just so cool, and I think the stadium setting as a whole is one I enjoy for this game. And with the added pleasure of different stage themes that occasionally come in, all in all, this is a pretty solid S tier for me. I love playing on this stage. Pokemon Stadium 2 is a bit different. You'd think I'd rank it the same, but it has a few subtle things that just barely bring it down for me. One being the lack of fireworks, which is a deep shame. Also, the colors are a bit more bright and blue, which normally I'd like, but for this environment I feel like having more of a focus on the nighttime scenery behind would help amplify it like it did for Pokemon Stadium. All that said though, it still checks off a lot more boxes that I really like, so I'm at least going to give it an A tier. Now outside of the Pokemon Stadiums, there's Arena Ferox, which has some really nice dark colors and lit torches, alongside the usual Coliseum appearance, which I think is actually pretty gnarly here. So overall, I quite like this look and I'm putting it in B tier. Coliseum, on the other hand, is a little bit worse off, if not just for the colors. I've never been a fan of that beige yellow look of sand and deserts and whatnot on their own, which is what this primarily is. I think the theming of a Coliseum is still pretty cool, so it's not a total loss, but I definitely prefer Arena Ferox over this, so this is a C tier. Then there's Boxing Ring, which has all of the good stuff I said before, with the monitor in the background and the darker colors, and I think the idea of duking it out in the boxing ring is awesome, even if I'm not into boxing or wrestling or anything. It doesn't have anything that quite elevates it into Pokemon Stadium tier, but it's still a super solid stadium stage, well, that has some really good colors and great energy, so I'm giving it an A tier. King of Fighters Stadium is pretty similar. It's got the monitor, good crowd and vibe overall, its sky changes through various pretty colors, and there's a really cool sense of scope here too that I love. You know, what with being in the middle of a huge football stadium. So yeah, once again A tier. And lastly is Spring Stadium, which I gotta say, checked 0 boxes off for me. I'm not a fan of the colors here, and there's no cool monitor or anything. The background is just a normal city, and it's daytime. And the overall theme is, you know, arms, which isn't really something I care about. To be honest, I think I'm gonna put this in D tier because of how little I care about it. I can see myself being convinced to maybe at least give it C tier, but that's not me right now. We covered a few of this sort of medieval stuff there, so how about we finish off that theme? I mean like castles and whatever. First is Temple, which despite being a Zelda stage, feels a bit lacking, you know? I like the sky backdrop and the fact that it's a floating island, but it all doesn't really come together. So that with the fact that there's not a lot of features that I feel particularly attached to, and this just gets a C tier. Just feels kind of typical, you know? Next, I guess Bridge of Eldin is worth bringing up here, and let me tell you right now, I absolutely love this stage. This area in Twilight Princess already has some super cool scenes, making it a great landmark, but the way they display it here is super cool with the gorgeous evening twilight and Hyrule Castle silhouette in the background, and Zora's River right below. It's all just exquisite. Easy S tier. Next, Castle Siege has been split into its 3 sections. The first is, you know, the siege part, which I think looks pretty neat. It does have a lot of basic forests and mountains in the backdrop, but the main focus is the castle exterior, which is under attack with some fires and smokes and whatnot, which overall I think is pretty interesting. So it's at least in B tier. Then we go to the Royal Hall, which has some nice space and good dark colors, and I like the torches and whatnot. Basically, I just like it. It's pretty easy to please with this general aesthetic, so this is also a B tier. However, the big part is when we go to the underground section. This stage transition has always stuck out to me, and is one of the things I thought of when deciding to rank certain stage transitions separately. The patterns and look of the magma is super cool, and I love how the ceiling of the cave looks, with all these stalactites. And there's these stalagmites on the ground, yes, there's apparently a difference. And just the sheer horizontal depth. It feels like we're in the Earth's mantle or something. And there's actually solid lighting throughout the stage, so it doesn't feel too dark. I've always wanted this part of the stage to be its own separate thing so I could just fight in it, and I just really like it. It doesn't have a lot to really tug at my emotions, but I do just love how it looks, even if the whole magma cave vibe doesn't usually win any prizes for me, so for that I'll give it an A tier. From the same series, we can go to the Garrigmach Monastery, which is generally just going through the castle. Personally, I kept this stage as just one thing because no individual part stuck out to me as being better or worse, it's just all kinda good. I like the kind of castle or cathedral vibe, both the interior and exterior, and overall it's nice. It doesn't have a lot of super cool set pieces or good colors that ramp it up, but I enjoy the theme still, so it goes into B tier. And we can't talk about castles without bringing up Dracula's castle. And I gotta say, I'm a very big fan of this. Castles in ruin are already a pretty cool look, but you pair that with the cloudy nighttime theme, the big moon in the background, and the stained glass, and you've got something I really like looking at. You're gonna see a lot of that shared in the S tier, which is where this is going. Speaking of ruined castles, I guess we can talk about those two Pokemon stages that kinda do that too. Starting with Spirit Pillar. I really love how this looks, as you probably could have guessed by now. The cave near the bottom has a really lovely glow to it, and the background as a whole has just a beautiful display of stars and colors and swirling clouds and whatnot. Not to mention the ruins themselves. I really like ancient ruins, if they're done right, and I think these look great. Not to mention when a legendary spawns in, they can cast a certain glow over the stage too, which is also great. All in all, I'm putting this one in S tier, I love playing here. The other one is the Unova Pokemon League, which I guess looks castle-like, right? Either way, ultimately this feels like a downgrade from Spirit Pillar, with less interesting colors and a less interesting ruins, I guess if you could call it that. I still kinda like it, but personally the thing that's hard carrying this stage for me is the lightning. I love lightning and thunderstorms in general, and if you've followed this channel close enough, you've probably heard me say that a few times already. But in Smash, there's very, very little representation of that, with this stage being one of them. Honestly though, I've thought about it, and I feel like the lightning that's present here isn't impactful enough to support everything else about the stage that I'm not huge on. The colors are still fairly bland and the backdrop isn't that interesting. It still looks cool though, so I think it'll take an A tier spot from me, but unfortunately, no, we cannot get much higher. And you know what, while we're at it, let's finish off the other Pokemon League, that being Kalos Pokemon League. The stage itself is absolutely gorgeous, with some really nice architecture going on, and some beautiful stained glass going all throughout. Like seriously, that stained glass has some great vibrant color. Though importantly, that color is blue, which, well, wouldn't you know, is my favorite color. Bet you didn't see that one coming. So it's all that, plus how cool the stage platform itself looks, and I just absolutely love the feel of this stage. I feel like I'm in blue heaven. Easy S tier. But as you know, this stage, much like the Pokemon Stadiums, has transformations, so I ended up separating all 4 transitions too. The main reason being that all of these transformations remove a lot of the stained glass from the background, making things feel less vibrant and interesting, and you know, they also just change the color up. I still think they all look cool, but not nearly as appealing. For Fire, the color scheme isn't my favorite out of the bunch, but you know, it still looks pretty cool. And the background that's used in these transformations, while not as good as the normal, is still interesting enough that it gets B tier. And the same is true for Steel, where I have the same thoughts. The swords in the stage are pretty cool too, as are the fire pillars. Now the water one, because of everything I've already mentioned, it becomes less blue and honestly just less interesting overall. So even though it's still kinda blue, it loses a lot of that extra punch, so this is also going to the B tier. And lastly is Dragon, which not only has a super cool looking, you know, dragon in the background, but it's also got a purple design, which I think just looks super cool with this stage's overall vibe, and it's an excellent transition, my favorite of the bunch. It still doesn't have as much vibrance or appeal as the basic Kalos look, but I still love how this works with everything. The dragon and purple complement the sort of royal vibe that the stage transforms into, so I'll put this in A tier. Actually, there's still some more stages that can loosely be related to castles or whatever, so let's do that. Reset Bomb Forest is a super cool look. It's kind of like Castle Siege, but it's got this awesome green glow going everywhere that I think looks extremely pleasant. The smoke and the fire that's at the bottom of the stage adds some nice contrast too. The background's details are still a bit boring, which is why this doesn't go any higher, but I absolutely love the color and basic vibe, so this is an A tier. Also like Castle Siege, the transition that happens afterwards is where things get ramped up. And this one is probably one of my favorite things in the game. The look of all of those tree branches wrapping around and around like a spiderweb or something, with all the red and pink glowing throughout. This is just not something I've really seen anywhere else. It's so entrancing and it's hard for words to do it properly, but I'm a huge fan. And it's been a while since I've played Categorizations Uprising, but this vibe is still crazy interesting. I want to put this in S tier for sure. If I had the option, I'd put it in some sort of elite tier for my all-time favorites maybe, but I decided to keep the tier count simple, so I'll just arbitrarily place it at the top of S tier and call it a day. Speaking of Categorizations, let's start with Skyworld. Earlier in this video, I said I'm not a huge fan of beige or yellow or whatnot. However, this here theming is the main exception to that. By theming, I mean ancient place above a sea of clouds. Sounds a bit specific, but old channel viewers may recognize this image as what I used in old channel backgrounds. This is kind of where that comes from. It's the entrance to the Palace of the Winds from the Minish Cap. And this kind of area has always made me really attached to the whole above the clouds thing, and I've grown to love this color of architecture in combination with that. Now Skyworld doesn't necessarily have that perfectly, but it's still got some good yellows with some funky glowing letters on the stage, and overall I think this general aesthetic is an A tier because of it. Rather than Skyworld, how about Skyloft? This is in the same boat, I love it as it's above the clouds and whatnot, though it is lacking in the type of architecture that reminds me of the Minish Cap, but it makes up for it by being, you know, Skyloft. I love Skyward Sword and have a lot of great memories in this town, and I think the overall vibe here is just great because of it. So because of this, I'm gonna put this in A tier as well. Back to Kid Icarus, there's also Palutena's Temple, right? Though you may recognize that this is one of those stages. The super huge ones, where it's kind of like a few mini stages in one. In the end, I decided to tackle these types of stages by just separating them into their main form and omega form. So the main form, it's got the cool stuff that I liked as I mentioned before, but it feels simultaneously too busy and also a bit more dull. It's hard to describe how I felt when looking throughout this stage, but nothing particularly drew out to me. The basics of it being high above the clouds with some yellowish stuff is good enough for me to at least like it, but I can't say I felt much more than that. I think I might just not like huge stages in general though, you know, there's just too much that they're trying to balance. So it's a B tier. However, the Omega version is just fine. Doesn't feel super busy, has a good identity, and does all the things I really liked about Skyworld. I'd argue I like this one a little bit more than Skyworld, but they're both pretty similar in what I like, so this is also an A tier. For the other big stage, the Omega version of Great Cave Offensive looks pretty neat on its own. I like its overall colors, and it's cool how the platform itself is split between nature and minerals. And I kinda like how the lighting is seeping in from the top, it looks cool. The background is a bit on the simple side, but I think that simplicity still works, and it gives the cave some really solid and cool depth. Honestly, I just really love how simple yet great the stage is. Love its colors and general cave theme and how it's executed, so I'm putting this in A tier. However, for the normal Great Cave Offensive stage, man, I wasn't sure if I should separate this into its individual parts, but those parts are so small and not even too interesting, and I just decided to judge this stage as a whole, and I gotta tell you, its vibe is like verbal diarrhea in visual form, especially with the lava scattered throughout, hanging on walls and ceilings in awkward ways. That just kinda kills the mood of whatever was around it. Like this mineral part here looks pretty cool, but then there's just this stuff that sticks out like a sore thumb. Alright, I'll leave the rant aside, just know that I do not like this stage very much. And I never played the Great Cave Offensive mode in Kirby, so I also don't have the nostalgia. So this is just in the D tier. The last D tier for this video. And the last big stage is, well, it's New Pork City, which keeps its main vibe even if it's in its Omega variant, so I'm just gonna use that. Off the bat, it gets points for two reasons. Those being the overall purple color, which I think is very nice, and the fact that it's from Mother 3, which is among my favorite games. And it does contain some pixel art in the background, you know, this whole thing is just a replica of New Pork City from Mother 3, as you would expect. Though as cool as that is, I also don't think it looks very good. It's another situation where it's kind of like verbal diarrhea in its visual form, just with a matching purple filter on it. I mean, it was made by Porky, so it makes sense, but I still gotta judge what I see. So as much as it hurts, I know I can't rank this too high. but I still like the purple color and bits of pixel art, and the fact that it's a Mother 3 stage, so I'm at least gonna give it B tier. I might as well cover the rest of the Mother stages then, starting with Onett, which I think is absolutely precious. Sure, it's very simple, but it's also very faithful to the Earthbound design and layout, which I really appreciate as a big Earthbound fan. I don't know how else to describe it other than pleasant. I like looking at the Earthbound vibe, and this is probably the only series where that whole toy-like aesthetic will be something I like. So yeah, it's faithful and cute, I just gotta give it an A tier. And with Magic Hint, I guess we've returned to cloud-based stages. This one is very, very pink, with pink clouds that I think are cool, though most of its appearance comes from the main Magic Hint area in the background. Now, pink ain't exactly my favorite color, but I do think this looks incredibly unique and gives off a very dreamy, whimsical vibe that I do love. Not to mention the plentiful Earthbound references that can appear, and this is another one I love, A tier. To end off the whole cloud theme is, well, the Cloud Sea of All Rest. And while this doesn't have the same type of architecture that reminds me of the Minish Cap, the clouds being white ends up reminding me of the Cloud Tops at least, which is equally as amazing. But enough about Minish Cap. Basically, the Cloud Sea of All Rest is potentially my single favorite stage in the game through the judgment of aesthetics. It's probably number 2. It has a great sense of scope, with this background and also the titans that occasionally hop in. Like, god, the titans are so huge and it's so cool. And you're close enough to the clouds that they can touch the stage, which gives its own refreshing and satisfying feel. I could go on, and I did in a video I made a long time ago. It was my first appreciating the little things video, which frankly I was only inspired to make because of this stage's inclusion. So you can check that out to hear me talk about that stage more, but basically, easy S tier. Speaking of things I went to length about in the past, how's about both Smashville and Town City? Stages that are pretty similar in how they look and function. Now, I've made an entire video dedicated around just these stages and nothing else. A video where I claim Smashville is my favorite stage ever. I think in general I still agree, but that mostly took into account overall function and whatnot and not just aesthetics. But even then, like I said in the video, I love how the stage looks because I have a lot of fun memories with Animal Crossing. So its general appearance is just something that makes me feel really at home. It's simple but great. And of course it has time variants, which I did create separate slots for because I just felt like I should. Overall, the day and evening variants of the two stages are an A tier because I do love them, but the night and dawn variants are an S tier because they have a special set of feels and memories to them that just puts them over it all. Again, after this video, feel free to watch that one from the past. It didn't get very good views when it came out, which sort of made me stop making the appreciating the whatever mini-series, but I still think it's a great video. Also, it was around this part of organizing the video that I realized just how long this project has been getting. A lesser man would have split this into 2 or maybe even 3 videos, but at this point I'm just gonna pull through. If you've been watching the whole way, I really appreciate your support. Feel free to pause and leave the rest of the video for later if you need, or maybe go grab a snack or do whatever you gotta do. Otherwise, let's just get into the last parts. I know I gotta take a water break, because I'm not used to talking this much. Oh, my throat hurts. Next, for a pretty big section, let's do everything that could loosely be identified as sci-fi. You know, space and spaceships and that kind of stuff. I'll definitely be stretching the definition here just as a heads up. First, I'll cover the 2 Brinstar stages, and I won't use their mega variants because the platforms between the 2 are identical, so I'll just go normal. I think Brinstar is pretty neat. It's got some Metroidy blobs, and the sea of yellow-green acid is a pretty cool aesthetic that we don't see anywhere else. It's also got the sack in the background. I mean, you can infer my comments on that. Though the colors overall in the stage are just a bit too dark. A lot of patches of just black void. And the level of details feel odd. Like, this is meant to be Brinstar from Metroid, but it doesn't really feel like any Brinstar that I remember. Like, there's a lot of different Brinstar vibes that I know of that they could have done that would have been a lot better, but I'm not going to get too into that. Basically, I think this looks okay, but just still boring, so I'm going to put it in the B tier. And all of the things I just said apply to Brinstar Depths, where it feels a bit generic overall. Though here they don't even add any unique acid color or anything, it's just lava. Which makes the endless void of the background a little bit harder to appreciate. Even if Kraid occasionally comes in, this overall feels extremely generic compared to a lot of the actual environments in Metroid, so I think this is just a C tier. The next Metroid stage is Norfair though, which I think does everything a lot better. Sure, it's also just got a lot of generic lava everywhere, but this lava actually lights up the whole place. There's a lot less patches of darkness and whatnot, and that alone makes me like it a lot more. Though this does win extra points with how much more Metroidy it feels. For one, Norfair is actually known for its ample amount of lava, so that works. Also, there's just decent variety here, with there being green circle things in the left part, which definitely reminds me of certain Norfair sections, and there's the usual blue doors that are an easy staple in Metroid. Plus there's these Chozo statue things that I also recognize from the game, and honestly the whole layout of the background just feels like it is from a Metroid game. I'm not sure how accurate it is precisely, but it feels like it. That's what's important. So yeah, because of that, I gotta give this an A tier. The colors are nice, and it's perhaps the only representation of Metroid in this game that really does anything for me. Which leaves Frigate Orpheon. From a third-party stance, this does look pretty cool and faithful to Metroid Prime, I think. But while I adore the 2D Metroid games to death, I could never get into any of the 3D ones, so that Prime representation doesn't do much for me. Plus, this is a little theme you're gonna hear going forward, but I don't really care for the whole high-tech aspect of sci-fi, from an aesthetics perspective. Or just in general, honestly. Never really liked it or cared for it or anything. I just don't really know what to say. It's not an instant loss for me, of course. I mean, again, I love Metroid, and in Fusion there's plenty of that kind of stuff, but I don't know, I also think the medium of pixel art helps make it seem more interesting there. Yeah, I don't usually like sci-fi shows or movies or games for that reason. I think the aesthetic of spaceships and crazy technology just isn't for me. But okay, I didn't mean to complain too much on Frigate Orpheon, because honestly I think this stage still looks pretty cool. It's got a lot of dark colors, but the subtle lights going throughout do make it feel a lot more interesting. And I think the Parasite Queen in the background makes for a really cool thing to look at during battle. So even if I feel very little attachment, they didn't go super crazy with the sci-fi tech and whatnot, and it still looks cool, so I'll give this a B tier. Next would be Lilac Cruise. Originally I was torn on this one, because on one hand there's just a whole lot of spaceships and dogfights and that sort of thing, which again I've never been into. But the thing is, the majority of this stage's feel is on space, and space can be pretty dang awesome. I do think it's not as awesome here as it could be, just a lot of black void with some stars, very few planets, and the biggest eye catcher is the asteroid field, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't at least like this. You'd think that as someone who's ranked things so high for just being based around nighttime, that I'd like anything even somewhat related to space, but I don't know. I feel like it's different in the context for sci-fi for me. It's hard to describe, but I guess just space on its own is different from the night sky with nature and Earth beneath it, which makes that feel a little bit more at home. I love space, but this doesn't go above and beyond enough for me, so I'm gonna give this a B tier. Though with enough time I could see myself being convinced of an A tier. What doesn't need convincing of A tier, though, is this section where they go closer to the atmosphere of Corneria. This really hits the spot. The start looks beautiful with much prettier colors and a cool shot of the planet in the background, and then going into the atmosphere gives a really great sense of height, and shows off all the nature and clouds and water from that height that I always love. I think this is what I like more in sci-fi settings. Focus on nature in different manners, rather than man-made things in empty voids of space. So this definitely goes into A tier for me. Speaking of Corneria, the stage based around that is also gorgeous. I don't know much about the Star Fox lore, but all I can tell you is that this is the sort of thing that I like from space travel and whatnot. The idea of going to different planets and different nature, but still feeling grounded. The big red moon in the background is an excellent piece of eye candy, and of course the focus on the ocean and occasional islands is also amazing. And I love the bit of yellow in the horizon that gives the sky a little bit of a unique feel. So even if there are sci-fi-y buildings on the islands, the abundance of beautiful nature and the different yet gorgeous backdrop definitely makes me love this. This is kind of why I love Alchemoth and Xenoblade Chronicles. Just that combination of high-tech doodads and beautiful, unique nature is super cool. I already love the whole expansive ocean and nature vibe, and I think this stage does it perfectly, so it gets an S tier. And for another planet visit, Venom is another good Star Fox stage. I feel like this is also really nice to look at. Normally the whole Rocky Mountains and lava aesthetic doesn't do too much for me on its own, but I feel like the fact that there's great lighting on this stage, with the red cloudy sky and the sun near the background, really helps me appreciate this more than just a dark cave with lava. Not to mention there's the section where they go into the cave and the lighting gets a bit more blue for a second, which gives off a sort of icy hot vibe throughout the stage. Not enough to where I want to rank them separately since this portion doesn't take up nearly as much time, but it's enough to where I can still appreciate it. So yeah, I think this is cool and I love it. So this is an A tier. And since space is still on the menu, I guess I might as well quickly bring up Mario Galaxy. I don't know, I love Mario Galaxy, as I'm sure many others do, but I've always found its combination of grassy Mario-y stuff and the space backdrop to be charming, but not great. I still feel like there's loads of places in Mario Galaxy that look way cooler than this, like maybe an airship or something that's in the background right now, as this is still a bit on the basic side when it comes to the game, but it's still good enough to where I at least like it, so this is a B tier. For more spacey stuff, I guess it's about time we tackled Final Destination, huh? And let me tell you, this stage has a lot going on. I split it into 3 parts, being the Dark Gone Storm Evil part, the green-blue glowy rift part, and the above the clouds happy part, I don't know. For the evil storm cloud part, the red line on the horizon is super menacing and matches perfectly with the black clouds and the ashes floating around, and the tendril looking things and whatnot. And I think the flashes of yellow-orange in the clouds also look super cool. If there's one thing holding this section back, it's the blue clouds around, which personally I feel like don't add much to this whole evil-y vibe, and just kinda make the whole thing a bit too busy for me. And this is coming from the guy who loves blue. If they put more focus on the evil reds and black storm clouds and whatnot, I think I'd like this even more, but I still really love this part, so I'm gonna put it in A tier. For the green rift part, I think this is probably my preferred section of the stage. It's got some really funky looking block objects in the back, and the hue being a blue-green combination and whatnot is really, really pretty, and I think it matches really well with the material of the stage platform itself. It displays very properly what I think can be cool in space stuff, and gives off a cool look while having excellent colors overall and isn't super busy or anything, so I'll give this an S tier. The above the clouds part, surprisingly, may be my least favorite of the bunch. Doesn't mean I dislike it, of course, but you'd think with how much I've gone over my love for clouds and heights and whatnot that this would be my jam. But if I had to describe it anyway, it'd be that it feels like there's just too many colors going on here. The yellows, the pinks, the purples, reds, blues, all that in combination with the stage itself, and I don't know, it just feels way too busy. So I can't really latch onto anything specific, you know? I still think it's cool and pretty, but I'm just gonna leave it in the B tier. Also, I want to point out the transition animations too, which don't last long enough for them to be considered their own thing, but I think they're cool enough to show off. This digital looking whatever you would call it is pretty funky, and I really love the vortex of malice that happens here. I think they look cool. Speaking of busy stages, I think we can talk about Northern Cave. Now, this stage has even more going on in it, to the point where I feel like I couldn't really separate it into different sections, because rather than going from one location, stopping, then going to another, it feels like it's a constant journey through a bunch of little places, with a bunch of things changing and happening, so I just decided to judge the whole thing. I think the overall vibe here is awesome. I love how much of it uses the green-blue color for its glows and whatnot, and the set piece with the meteorite and whatnot is absolutely stellar. If some of these pieces were their own thing that lasted for much longer, I could see parts of the stage going to S tier, but as it stands, there's quite a few places that just sort of look whatever, and as an overall package, there is a lot going on. But I still think this all looks super cool, so it goes into A tier. Let's go into the other Final Fantasy stage with Midgar. This one has more of a steampunk vibe, I think that's what you'd call it, right? I don't really like the steampunk vibe very much, as an aesthetic. You know what? At this point, let's just say that I'm not huge on technology as an aesthetic, and I guess we'll save a lot of legwork. So yeah, I think it looks neat, but I don't quite care for that vibe. And I also don't really care for Final Fantasy as a series, so there's nothing there either. I will say though that this stage is hard carried by that beautiful green glow that lights up everything. This is a pretty easy way to make me at least like a stage, and because of that, I'm gonna give this B tier. For other, I guess, technology stages, if you will, Riley Castle is here too. Maybe? I don't know. I've never been into Mega Man either, and this just doesn't have a lot going on. Like, it's got the basic castle design, but then everything else is just basic mountains that get cut off into a void. And the stage itself doesn't look that cool to me. I don't know, the fact that this is at nighttime and the spotlights around the castle do help me at least enjoy looking at this, but again, it can't go much higher. So I'll put this in B tier. And then there's Shadow Moses Island, which is a bit more militaristic, which is another vibe I'm not big on, but for some weird reason, I've always liked the look a bit more when it's combined with snow, which this is. So it wins points there. Plus it has a nice blue hue over everything, which is lovely, and the spotlight is cool. And when the Metal Gear or whatever appears in the background, it adds a faint red glow to everything for a little bit, which is also pretty cool. All in all, it has just a lot of subtle elements that I like and think work really well together. So surprisingly, this one goes into A tier for me. Alright, let's wrap up the whole kinda maybe sci-fi section with some F-Zero stuff. Starting with Big Blue. I mean, I look at this and my knee-jerk reaction is, holy crap, it's just the ocean. I love that. But I gotta step back and think about this. There are some cool details like the dome scattered throughout, that's pretty neat. And the constant racetrack and whatnot, that's cool too. And I think the yellow on this stage is a good contrast to all of that blue. But, I mean, overall, it is just pretty basic. And as much as I love oceans, I can't help but feel like that level of simplicity shouldn't push it over the edge. Obviously, I still love this, but I'll keep it at A tier. Yeah, I'm fighting my blue-loving, ocean-loving demons there, but I don't think it's worth S tier, honestly. And the other F-Zero stage is Port Town Aerodive. Even though this stage has a lot of focus on high-tech racetrack and spaceships and I guess Rob, there's just so much beauty everywhere else. The evening glow in the background being paired with the starry night is a gorgeous backdrop in and of itself, but then you've got the area below the stage actually being a planet, with clusters of lights and whatnot. The idea of a whole racetrack being propped up this high above the planet, and having this lovely time of day, and I just can't help but absolutely love this stage. This goes right to S tier. Speaking of evening-esque stages, Halberd is there too, which I guess technically has a ship, but whatever. Basically, I love this stage. Got that gorgeous sunset look, nice colors, and honestly the Halberd itself looks really cool. There aren't very many ships that I look at and think, hey, I like that. The only place where this stage loses points though is its repetition, with the endless sea and endless repeating cloud patterns and whatnot. So I can't say I love this too much, but it's still a great vibe. So I'll put that in A tier. How about we cover the other sunset stages? Let's start with Suzaku Castle, which, man, this looks unbelievably gorgeous. The sunset, the wooden platform for the stage itself, the Japanese architecture for the buildings around. I feel like I don't even have to say much at this point for you to know that I'm going to love how this stage looks. Plain and simple S tier. Next would be Congo Jungle, which could technically fall under the low graphics section I did a long time ago now, but I think the sunset aesthetic alone really helps carry this. But there's also the fact that this creates silhouettes in the trees in the background, which looks super pretty. And also I just have nostalgia for Donkey Kong Country that helps further carry this. It's still, a bit low in graphics, but I do still love it, so I'll give it an A tier. The similar stage, Jungle Japes, doesn't have to worry about its polygon count, as it looks just gorgeous. I love the look at the jungle like this, and the water at the bottom of the stage is super satisfying too. While Cranky's Cabin does block some of the sunset, its color still flows throughout the stage, and yeah, I just absolutely love how this looks again, S tier. And the last Donkey Kong stage is Congo Falls, which also has that jungle aesthetic that I love so much. So much so that even though it's just a normal daytime, I find this stage incredibly satisfying to look at. Perhaps it's the running water from the waterfall or the docks that are used as a stage platform, but either way, I love this natural, tropical aesthetic so much, and I think it's done so well here. So this is another S tier. Alright, I want to start going through things, so let me tackle all the tropical stages at once. To start, Great Bay is one I'm sure you don't need me to explain. I mean, come on, it's Majora's Mask, one of my favorite Zelda games, and thus one of my favorite games, and is very faithful to that design. It's got the Pirate's Fortress over there, as well as the heart piece right there. It's got the moon falling from the sky, it's got plenty of other details, and it's a beach. Yeah, that's an S tier for my Zelda-loving, beach-loving brain. Next would be Delfino Plaza, which is another nostalgia case, as I absolutely love Mario Sunshine, one of those other major games I grew up with. Now, if I try to look at this place on its own, I'm not huge on the reds and oranges and whites throughout, but man, it's still got that lovely tropical feel, and again, it's Mario Sunshine. All those factors put this in A tier, I think. Next, Tortimer Island is hard to judge since it has a different appearance at random, but let's just assume we're working with a version that has trees, because we are. I don't know, all I can tell you is that I have spent many hours on this island, catching rare fish and bugs and just having a great time. The fact that this provided a summer season for me in the game without me having to, time travel, is another aspect that makes me really love it. Even though I'd like it even more if it had a day-night cycle, or just time variance, like Smashville and such, I still love this for those deep, nostalgic reasons. And again, I love beaches and the Animal Crossing style, so this is another S tier. And lastly, for tropical stages are Pilot Wings and Woohoo Island, which both sort of base their aesthetics off of the Wii Sports Resort Island. I think this type of island is honestly super cool. It's the exact type of place I'd love to go to for vacation, doing a bunch of sports outside in the lovely sun and whatnot. So even if it's ultimately very simple, it's what I love. So Woohoo Island gets an A tier for that reason, especially because its transitions let us see more of the island. Pilot Wings maintains more of a bird's eye view, so I feel like it's a little bit less interesting and it wouldn't feel right giving it the same tier, but I at least still like that bird's eye view, so I'm gonna put it in B tier. Let's finish off the Mii related stuff, starting with Find Me, or also called Street Pass Quest. Already I like its vibe, with the dark clouds and whatnot. I don't love the purples, blues, and pinks going over orange, brown, and red and whatnot. but I still think it's a very cool backdrop. The biggest aspect that stands out, though, is the lightning. It's not as frequent as I'd like, but I still think it looks very cool, and it at least makes me love this stage, so I'm going to give it an A tier. The other one is Tomodachi Life. Now this one is a bit weird because it's got 6 different rooms, right? Each with their own little design. Not to mention however many possible room designs there are to choose from, I didn't bother looking it up. So honestly, the potential to add over a dozen things to review, plus how little I really care for them, and I'm just considering this stage as its own package, alright? And when I do that, it feels just really bland. It's got water, sure, it's a bit blue I guess, but the background doesn't have a lot of neat stuff to offer, and the hotel itself is just kind of whatever for me. And considering all of the rooms don't usually match together, it's just kind of all over the place, and I'm just going to go ahead and put this in the C tier. And it's not really Miis, but it doesn't have anywhere else to go, so let's talk about living room. I kind of like the idea of being small and having normal things be big, but I feel like that's not really brought to its fullest potential here. I think it's very cute, as are the pets, and the blocks and whatnot that can appear are also cute, but the overall vibe of the house is just kind of bland, and the rug is very ugly. I still like it, but I'm not super into it, so it gets a B tier. Speaking of being small, the Pikmin stages are next. Distant Planet looks pretty cool, and I like the idea of bigger than normal much better when it comes to nature. I guess that's another thing I picked up from Minish Cap. Though I do feel like both this and Garden of Hope don't capitalize on that as much as they could, just like before. And as someone who's not into the Pikmin series, it can't carry any extra emotions. The background's a bit blurry, there's nothing super huge or out of the ordinary, it's got the basic vibe that I like, but I just don't think there's a lot more that I want. So I'll just give both B tier. Since I was pretty vague in that section, I'm gonna try to specify my feelings more, but when I say I like the idea of things being bigger than normal, I think I want them to be so big that they completely reshape how you look at and approach the object. Like massive stuff. But in the context of Smash, we don't ever really get close to anything like that. So any objects bigger than normal don't serve as anything other than basic background decoration, I guess. You feel me? Alright, at this point I'm just going to rapid fire all the remaining stages with no real theming. First, Fountain of Dreams is one that I'm so glad got into this game because of just how gorgeous it looks. Sure, it's got a lot of colors going on, but I think the black void of space behind it balances it out pretty nicely. But let's be real here, the main thing I love about this stage is the water on the floor. The fact that it mirrors you reminds me of those Salt Lake images that you sometimes see, and I've always found this effect so entrancing. Sure, it's not used perfectly here, but even just a little bit is enough for me to make this an S tier stage. Next, let's talk about Mushroomy Kingdom. Now you know how earlier in the video I mentioned I don't really like the desert vibe, all the beige and yellow and all that? I'm still not a fan of it, but seeing that vibe used for the classic Mario 1-1 level is really interesting. It makes me feel like something horrible happened, or perhaps we're centuries into the future now. It's not enough to make me love it, but it's enough to make me appreciate the stage and actually kinda think about it. So it goes in the B tier. Another desert themed one is Gerudo Valley. And this is another exception because, it's Gerudo Valley. Come on. You can see the Gerudo training grounds in the corner, you've got the tent, the bridge, the river that goes to Lake Hylia. I can't look at this and not have Gerudo Valley's theme music come into mind. It's awesome here, so the Zelda Bias score is yet another A tier. Next, the Hollow Bastion is one that is conceptually pretty cool. The main attraction is obviously the castle thing. Warning, I've never played a Kingdom Hearts game and I don't care to since I don't think I'd like it or anything. But it looks like the castle has been sort of split, with what looks like coppered tubes almost taking over it. It's a pretty cool idea for a setting. But I also feel like there's just way too much pink here, which doesn't really work well with the colors of the castle, in my opinion. So while I think this is cool, it's only something I end up liking, really. So I will give it a B tier. The Dive to the Heart looks a little different. I know that there's a few variants that change color and whatnot, but I'm judging them all the same. The black void with some kind of smoke or whatever makes this seem pretty mystical, which would normally be a pretty big drawback in its simplicity, but I don't know, for some reason I feel like it works in this context. And then you got the pretty stained glass with cool art on it, that's fun. And the stage itself is also stained glass, which is also fun. Yeah, honestly, I just really love how all this works together. And while some of the potential color combinations are better than others, I still love this. So it gets A tier. Next, Mementos is a really cool stage. Persona 5 has always had some extremely impeccable style in it. And I feel like that's not a very uncommon take. So being able to have that in Smash in any form is super cool. Granted, I feel like the extent in which we got it here isn't as great as it could have been, what with the limited 2D backgrounds and whatnot, but I do still think it's a good amount, with the flashy looking UI and animations and whatnot, and how there's a pink little splash in your steps. So the Persona 5 one gets an A tier because of that. The Persona 4 one is very yellow, which I don't love, but it's still stylized like before, and Persona 4 is my favorite game of the bunch, so it's also an A tier. And the Persona 3 one is blue. Yeah, that's an S tier. Okay, we're nearing the end. Let's go. Alright, let's talk about the last nighttime stages. First is Summit. I think this stage is very simple in what it does. But what it does is something that I love. That being a glacial setting at night with the beautiful northern lights. It helps that the ice is kind of blue, too. There's not really a lot for me to say other than I think these things in combination are enchanting. So this goes to S tier. Though there is a section where you fall down the summit and land in the water. When this happens, it turns daytime for some reason. And it still looks pretty cool, and I still kinda like it. But without the northern lights or nighttime or anything, the colors start to blend in a bit more, and it doesn't do as much for me, so this is a B tier. Next is Luigi's Mansion. Let me just tell you that I love the moon, and oh boy, that sure is a moon. This paired with the dark green of the mansion itself, and I think the colors here are immaculate with a great vibe. And I feel like I'm getting to the point where I don't have to explain as much, so this is just S tier. Next is Umbra Clock Tower, which I liked a lot when I first saw it. But now that I actually pay attention to it, I don't know. I think it's still cool. I mean, the idea of the stage itself being a fallen, broken clock tower is dope. And there's a lot of cool monsters that fly by, and the moon itself is, there. But man, there's a lot of movement on this stage, let me tell you. All the falling and going upside down. It almost makes me a little motion sick. Not to mention, there's just a lot of colors in the stage that blend in. The cliff and the clock tower and stuff. I still like it, but it's also a bit much for me, and nothing really truly stands out, so I'm just going to put it in B tier. And lastly, Mishima Dojo is an awesome vibe. The dojo itself is very cool. I love the architecture, and the light from the torches adds some great color. But then you start breaking the walls like a maniac, and then the moonlight starts pouring in with the mountain backdrop faintly peeking out, and the wind blows the flames of the torches, and man, I love fighting here. The Omega version, without having as much dojo, does lose out a little bit, but not by much, and overall this stage is an easy S tier for how awesome it is. And there's 2 more stages left. First being the Great Plateau Tower. I mean, judging this is akin to just judging the graphics of Breath of the Wild, and while I have my complaints about that game, its visuals definitely weren't one of them. For most things, I mean. Like, this is just a complete replica of the game's view, and it looks super cool. The only thing it's missing is a day-night cycle or whatever, but even just this is really neat, and I love the ancient Sheikah technology designs too, for the stage itself. But it being just a landscape rather than any specific cool setting does make it lose a few points, since it's kind of just got a lot of stuff going on. But I still love it very much, so it goes into A tier. And lastly for this video is, of course, Pirate Ship. I feel like I need to say very little here, but I'm still going to say stuff. The Great Sea has always been one of my favorite overworlds in general. I loved exploring it as a kid. And it may not be a huge exaggeration to say that it's because of this that I love the ocean as much as I do now. And the Wind Waker graphic style is one of my favorites in gaming. If this stage had a nighttime version, or if the storm that happens lasted longer with perhaps less intrusive rain graphics, I'd make a separate SS tier for just that. But even just with the daytime and cloudy variants, this stage is definitely my favorite in the game based off of graphics, because it depicts one of my favorite overworlds with some of my favorite graphics while using my beloved ocean, and yeah, easy S tier to end off the video. Man, oh man, I am very tired of speaking. I'm sorry if my voice started getting hoarse towards the end. I'm not sure how it sounds now, but obviously I'm not gonna re-record that. I would probably die if I did that. Anyways, I'm not gonna drag things off any longer. Here's the final tier list. I'll leave it up now, if you can even read it. That's a total of 155 different options to choose from. And admittedly, I probably should have added a few more that I just decided not to because I didn't think it was too necessary. I'll link the template in the description if you're curious enough to make one yourself. Otherwise, head down to the comments and tell me your thoughts about anything, really. Your favorite stages, opinions on some of my thoughts, what you had to eat today. As for my overall thoughts after making this video, a lot more of the stages are, I guess to use the word one last time in the video, basic than I was expecting. Like sure, they can carry over their respective game's style, but I guess in how a stage is meant to represent a whole series or game, they usually choose one that could be more iconic for that series or game, which usually ends up being among the first levels. So there wasn't a ton of room for as many amazing set pieces as there could have been. But even considering that, there's still a really good number of stages that I love, for one reason or another, and even having almost 30 stages in the favorite tier is pretty impressive. So overall, I'm happy. Again, like I said at the beginning, a part of me wishes I was able to go more in depth about each individual stage, but I mean, you can see the runtime with what I did anyways. Maybe it would have been smarter to split this up into multiple videos, but oh well. I still had a good time and I hope everyone here did too. And with that, I'd like to thank my patrons Rain, Scully, Civilian700, Burbo, Sick and the Dink, and everyone else for their support. Stay casual, and I'll see y'all later.